You open your eyes inside a dream, and there it is again. The same hallway, the same street, the same abandoned house frozen in time. No matter how many nights pass, no matter how the story changes, the setting stays exactly the same, as if your mind is trapped inside a loop that only exists while you sleep. You walk through the familiar doorway. You recognize the walls, the smells, the shapes of shadows. You know what comes next. You've been here dozens of times, maybe hundreds. But in waking life, you have never seen this place. Why does the dreaming mind return to the same scenario over and over again? Why does it replay the same street, the same room, the same impossible landscape? Sometimes for years? Is it a message? A memory? A psychological pattern? A glitch in the architecture of the sleeping brain? Or something far deeper? A symbolic arena where the unconscious is trying to finish a story it can't tell during the day. Tonight, we explore one of the most haunting mysteries of dream science and psychology. Why do some dreams repeat the same scenario eternally? What if the place you return to in your sleep isn't just a dream, but a constructed world? A persistent mental stage built for a purpose your conscious mind has not yet understood. Welcome to the forgotten rooms, the looping landscapes, the recurring environments where your inner narrative keeps unfolding, and where the truth about yourself waits in silence. Recurring dream scenarios are far more common than most people realize. While individual dream stories change from night to night, many dreamers report a strange and persistent phenomenon. The same setting reappearing repeatedly, sometimes for months, sometimes for decades. A forest that doesn't exist, a house they've never lived in, a school they never attended, a city composed of familiar pieces rearranged into something impossible. These places are not simply reused backgrounds. They feel stable, almost like real locations within the architecture of the mind. Some dreamers even describe them as a dream territory or parallel world that they revisit without meaning to. Others feel an uncanny familiarity, as if the dream scenario has a memory of its own. What makes this phenomenon so compelling is its consistency. While normal dreams tend to shift chaotically, rooms changing shape, landscapes dissolving, the recurring setting dream feels structured. The staircase is always in the same place. The hallway always leads to the same door. The abandoned store always has the same flickering light. The dreamer experiences continuity, as if the brain preserves this scenario in long-term storage. But why? Why would the mind choose to recreate the same environment night after night? There are several possibilities. It may be a psychological stage, set designed to process unfinished emotional material. It may be a neural shortcut, using a familiar framework to conserve cognitive energy during dreaming. It may be rooted in memory fragments linked through association rather than literal recollection. It may reflect unresolved conflicts or developmental themes repeating until integrated. Or it could be a kind of dream hub, a default simulation built from deep structures of the self. Recurring dream environments touch multiple domains of human experience: memory, trauma, longing, identity, and cognitive architecture. Whether comforting or unsettling, these persistent dream places often reveal something about how the mind organizes meaning. Scientifically, they raise profound questions about the nature of the dream world. Are dreams temporary hallucinations, or are they internal simulations with continuity? Blueprints that the brain revisits to test new behaviors, rehearse responses, or process emotional challenges. Psychologically, they connect to deeper questions. Why this place? Why this structure? Why does the mind refuse to let it go? Many people discover, upon reflection, that the recurring dream scenario corresponds to a particular emotional theme: fear, nostalgia, transformation, guilt, curiosity, or identity. Others find that the place evolves slowly over years, mirroring changes in their inner life. This video will delve into all of this. We will explore what modern psychology reveals about recurring dream settings, analyze the emotional and cognitive mechanisms behind them, Examine how memory networks contribute to stable dream architecture, and review real cases in which people experience the same dream scenario for decades. Because when a dream chooses to repeat itself, it is not random, it is communication, it is pattern, it is meaning trying to take form. And the place you return to in your dreams may be the map you never knew you were walking. Recurring dream settings are not accidents. They are psychological constructs, built by the mind with purpose. When the same environment appears over and over, it often reflects a stable emotional theme, an unresolved conflict, or a deeply rooted pattern in the dreamer's inner life. To understand why a dream scenario repeats eternally, we must examine the psychological mechanisms that shape these internal landscapes. 1. The mind's emotional stage set. Dreams frequently use environments as containers for emotion. A recurring dream setting is like a psychological theater stage, reused because it effectively represents a particular feeling or conflict. A narrow hallway may symbolize anxiety. A vast, empty field might represent loneliness. A childhood home may evoke nostalgia or unresolved attachment. The brain chooses a setting not for its realism, but for its emotional accuracy. When the same emotion persists in waking life, the same scenario returns in dreams. 2. Unresolved internal narratives. Recurring settings often reflect unfinished psychological stories. The dreamer may be working through grief, processing trauma, confronting fears, revisiting childhood themes, navigating identity shifts. The mind brings them back to the same symbolic environment until the emotional narrative is completed. The dream scenario becomes a loop, not because the brain is malfunctioning, but because the psyche is insisting, "We are not finished here." 3. Memory architecture and associative mapping. Dream settings are built not from a single memory, but from composites, fragments of places stitched together through emotional association. A recurring setting may represent multiple memories merged into one symbolic place, an emotional hub connecting different life experiences, a spatial metaphor for the mind's internal map. When the same associations remain active, the same environment resurfaces. It becomes the default simulation for whatever emotional or cognitive process the brain is attempting to navigate. 4. Comfort through familiarity. Some recurring settings arise because the mind seeks stability during dreaming. A familiar environment reduces cognitive load, allowing the brain to focus on emotional processing rather than constantly generating new locations. This is especially common when the recurring place feels neutral or safe. It becomes a kind of inner sanctuary, a place your mind trusts. 5. Psychological repetition compulsion. From a deeper psychoanalytic perspective, recurring dream settings may represent a form of repetition compulsion, the tendency of the psyche to recreate unresolved emotional situations until they are understood or integrated. The mind repeats the environment because it is repeating the lesson. The dreamer walks the same street, enters the same room, climbs the same staircase, seeking resolution that the waking self may be avoiding. 6. Identity and self-development. Some recurring dream environments evolve over time, reflecting psychological growth. The structure may expand, brighten, or reveal new rooms. These shifts are not random. They symbolize inner transformations. When the dream setting changes, it means you are changing. 7. Symbolic territory of the unconscious. There are dreamers who describe recurring scenarios that feel like other worlds, with consistent geography and laws. These may represent deep unconscious territories, stable symbolic environments that act as long-term containers for personal myth, shadow elements, or core identity themes. They are the landscapes of the inner self. When a dream returns you to the same scenario night after night, it is a meaningful psychological message. The place itself is a symbol, a memory, a wound, a story, a mirror. And until the mind is done speaking, the dream will keep bringing you back. From a neuroscientific perspective, Recurring dream settings reveal something profound about how the brain constructs space, memory, and internal simulation during sleep. While dreams may feel fluid and chaotic, the neural machinery that generates them is highly organized. And when a scenario repeats eternally, it reflects the underlying architecture of the sleeping brain. 1. The brain's spatial generator, the hippocampal loop. At the center of this phenomenon is the hippocampus, the region responsible for spatial memory and navigation. During REM sleep, the hippocampus becomes active, replaying spatial maps, just as it does when we remember real locations. But dreams aren't exact memories. The hippocampus recombines fragments of spaces into new environments. If a particular configuration of memories repeatedly activates the same neural pathway, the brain may reconstruct the same scenario every time. In neuroscience, this is known as pattern completion, the brain filling in missing details based on previously activated networks. This means your recurring dream world may be the brain's default reconstruction for a particular emotional or memory pattern. 2. The predictive coding model of dreams. Another explanation comes from predictive coding, the theory that the brain constantly generates predictions about reality. During REM sleep, sensory input is almost zero, so the brain relies entirely on internal models. If the brain has a stable internal model for a specific environment, it may reuse it repeatedly because it requires less neural energy. It matches ongoing emotional themes, it provides consistent structure for narrative simulation. Your brain might simply be saying, "This scenario works, we will use it again." 3. Emotional memory and the amygdala-hippocampus circuit. Recurring dream settings often appear when emotional experiences are strongly encoded. The amygdala, which processes emotional salience, can repeatedly trigger the same spatial memory circuits if the emotion is unresolved or intense. For example, anxiety may trigger the same labyrinth-like environment. Sadness may activate a specific empty room scenario. Unresolved fear may reconnect to the same dark corridor. The emotional circuit becomes a switch that reopens the same neural folder. 4. Neural efficiency and dream compression. The brain is extremely efficient. During REM sleep, it tries to process massive amounts of emotional and memory material. Instead of building new environments from scratch, it may reuse familiar spatial templates. This is similar to how the brain replays compressed versions of memories during sleep. A recurring dream scenario can be seen as a compressed neural file reused to manage emotional or cognitive work. 5. Long-term dream maps and cognitive stability. Some neuroscientists believe dreamers develop stable spatial frameworks, like mental maps, that persist for years. These internal maps function similarly to virtual environments in video games, consistent layouts that provide structure for unpredictable events. For some people, these dream maps are a single house, a recurring city, a forest, a surreal architectural labyrinth. These settings are stored not as literal locations, but as stable neural patterns, blueprints the brain can reactivate at will. 6. Why the scenario feels eternal. A fascinating aspect of recurring dream settings is that they feel old, as if they have existed for a lifetime. This sensation arises because REM sleep activates memory networks in a way that blends past, present, and imagination. The dream setting feels eternal because the brain reactivates it with the same neural signature each time. To the mind, repetition feels like continuity. 7. The loop is not a glitch, it's architecture. Neuroscience shows that recurring dream scenarios are not errors. They are the result of stable neural pathways, emotionally charged circuits, memory pattern reactivation, predictive spatial modeling. In other words, the brain builds a place and then returns to it whenever that internal architecture is needed. Dream scenery repeats because the mind is returning to the same neural room, the same emotional pattern, the same psychological territory. And until those circuits change, the dream world stays exactly as it is. Recurring dream settings have fascinated psychologists and neuroscientists for decades. While dreams themselves are difficult to study in controlled environments, patterns in long-term dream journals, clinical reports, and sleep laboratory interviews reveal surprising consistencies. Across cultures, ages, and backgrounds, people often describe returning to the same dream world as if it were a private dimension they revisit nightly. One of the earliest systematic investigations into recurring dreams came from Calvin Hall, who compiled more than 50,000 dream reports throughout the 20th century. Hall noted that dream content shifts constantly, yet many participants described stable environments that reappeared for years. These were not exact replicas of real places, but hybrid constructions built from memory fragments. Hall proposed that the mind creates dream scripts stored in long-term memory, reactivated when certain emotional conditions arise. In a more recent series of studies at the University of Montreal, researchers tracked dream patterns over several months using REM awakenings. Participants were woken during REM sleep and asked to immediately describe their dream environments. Astonishingly, many subjects revisited the same scenario night after night, even when the storyline changed completely. Brain imaging during these episodes showed repeated activation of the same hippocampal spatial networks, suggesting a neural template used to generate the environment. Documented clinical cases add even more depth. One patient, followed by dream researcher Dr. Antonio Zadra, described returning to a surreal multi-level shopping mall for more than 20 years. The layout never changed. The central escalator, the flickering neon sign, the locked glass doors. Over time, however, the patient's relationship to the mall evolved. Early dreams featured anxiety, chasing, and confusion. Later dreams involved exploration and curiosity. Eventually, the recurring mall disappeared altogether, coinciding with emotional breakthroughs in therapy. This case became a classic example of how recurring dream environments may reflect psychological processing over time. Another documented case in the journal Dreaming described a woman who repeatedly dreamed of the same cliffside house overlooking a stormy ocean. She had never visited such a place in her life, yet the house remained visually consistent for over a decade. It appeared during major life transitions, graduation, new jobs, relationship changes. The house became an anchor for uncertainty, a symbolic meeting point where the unconscious processed instability and identity changes. Even lucid dream research has uncovered extraordinary evidence. Long-term lucid dreamers often report having recurring stable dream worlds, entire cities, landscapes, or buildings that remain consistent across years. These environments behave like persistent virtual spaces created by the brain, complete with familiar geography. Some lucid dreamers have mapped these dream worlds meticulously, confirming that structures remain consistent across experiences. Researchers speculate that these individuals may have unusually stable neural activation patterns for spatial representation during REM. Experimental research also supports the idea of dream default settings. In a study from the University of Bern, participants were asked to imagine dream scenarios while awake and during REM dreams. When asked to create a dream setting spontaneously, many defaulted to the same internal landscape they had described in previous dreams. This suggests that recurring dream worlds are not random at all. They are deeply embedded cognitive architectures. Across cases and studies, one pattern becomes clear. Recurring dream scenarios function like neural and psychological landmarks. They are internal territories built from emotion, memory, and stable neural pathways. These territories remain available for the mind to revisit whenever a specific emotional or cognitive process needs to unfold. The dream setting repeats not because the brain is stuck, but because it is returning to the place where the work happens. There is something haunting about returning again and again to a place that exists only in your dreams. A hallway you've never walked in waking life. A street that shifts slightly yet always feels the same. A house you know intimately, though you have no memory of ever living there. These places sit quietly at the edge of consciousness, waiting for you every night like old friends or unfinished stories. Recurring dream settings remind us that the mind is not just a passive observer, it is an architect. It builds landscapes the way a poet builds metaphors, carefully, intentionally, symbolically. And when the same environment appears over and over, it is rarely just repetition. It is communication. A recurring dream place is a kind of psychic home base, a stage where your inner conflicts perform their dances, a memory that never existed but still feels ancient, a symbolic arena where your emotional life unfolds. These dreamscapes hold meaning because they hold you. Your fears echo in their corridors. Your hopes shimmer in their skylines. Your unresolved questions linger in their shadows. And every time you return, the environment reflects something slightly different, depending on who you are that night and who you are becoming. Some recurring settings feel restrictive, like a maze you can't escape. Others feel comforting, like a sanctuary built from your deepest need for safety. Some evolve, some disappear, some stay exactly the same, as if carved into the architecture of your unconscious mind. And that is the beauty of them. Because in these places, the psyche reveals how it organizes experience, not chronologically but symbolically, not geographically but emotionally, not by logic but by meaning. When a dream insists on repeating the same scenario eternally, it's an invitation, a chance to look more closely at the story unfolding inside you. A prompt to ask, why this place? Why now? What lesson is hidden in these walls, these streets, this impossible landscape that only I return to? In the end, recurring dream settings are not prisons, they are mirrors. Mirrors of memory, of emotion, of identity. Places built by the mind to show you who you are and what still needs to be understood. So the next time you wake from that familiar dream, stepping out of the same imaginary doorway you've walked through 100 times, pause for a moment. The dream is not just repeating, it is revealing, because the place you keep returning to may not be a dream at all, but a map of the inner world you are still learning to navigate.